In the dense, misty forests of northern Michigan, where the trees whispered secrets to the wind and the moon hung low like a watchful eye, there was a legend that sent shivers down the spines of even the bravest souls. They called it Dogman, a creature with the body of a man and the head of a wolf, its eyes glowing like embers in the dark. Some said it was a curse, others a guardian, but no one knew for sure. The only thing certain was that those who encountered it were never the same again. It was late autumn when Emma, a wildlife photographer, arrived in the small town of Black Hollow. She had heard rumors of strange howls echoing through the woods and paw prints too large to belong to any ordinary animal. Determined to uncover the truth, she packed her camera gear and set out into the forest, ignoring the warnings of the locals. The first night was uneventful. The forest was eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. But on the second night, as Emma set up camp near a creek, she heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Her heart raced as she grabbed her camera, her hands trembling. The growl grew louder, closer, until the underbrush rustled and a pair of glowing eyes emerged from the shadows. Emma froze. The creature before her was unlike anything she had ever seen. It stood on two legs, its muscular frame covered in dark fur, its wolf-like head tilted as if studying her. She raised her camera, her instincts as a photographer overriding her fear. The flash went off, and for a split second, the Dogman was illuminated in stark detail. Then, with a snarl, it vanished into the night. The next morning, Emma returned to town, her hands still shaking as she reviewed the photos. The image of the Dogman was clear, undeniable proof of its existence. But as she showed the pictures to the townsfolk, their reactions were not what she expected. They didn't seem surprised. Instead, they looked at her with pity, as if she had stumbled upon something she wasn't meant to see. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. The howls returned, louder this time, closer. She peered out her window and saw shadows moving in the moonlight, shapes that were too large to be wolves, too human to be animals. The air grew heavy, and a sense of dread settled over her. She knew the Dogman was coming for her, but she didn't know why. As the howls grew deafening, Emma made a decision. She grabbed her camera and stepped outside, determined to face the creature head-on. The forest was alive with movement, the trees swaying as if in a storm. And then there it was, the Dogman standing at the edge of the clearing, its eyes locked on hers. Emma raised her camera, but before she could take the shot, the Dogman let out a bone-chilling howl that echoed through the night. The sound seemed to pierce her very soul, and she felt a strange connection to the creature, as if it were trying to tell her something. But before she could understand, the Dogman turned and disappeared into the shadows once more. The next morning, Emma was gone. Her camera was found in the clearing, the memory card wiped clean. The townsfolk whispered that she had been taken by the Dogman, but no one could say for sure. Some claimed to have seen her wandering the forest, her eyes glowing like embers in the dark. Others said she had become one with the legend, a part of the mystery that would forever haunt Black Hollow. And so, the story of Emma and the Dogman became another chapter in the town's dark history, a tale with no clear ending, only questions that lingered in the howling shadows of the forest. Emma's disappearance sent ripples through Black Hollow, but the forest remained as silent and foreboding as ever. Weeks turned into months, and the townsfolk began to speak of her in hushed tones, as if her name alone might summon the Dogman from the shadows. Some claimed to hear her voice carried on the wind, a faint whisper among the trees. Others swore they saw her figure darting through the woods at dusk, her silhouette blending with the creature that had taken her. But Emma was not gone, not entirely. Deep within the forest, where the sunlight barely pierced the canopy, she wandered. Her memories were fragmented, like shards of glass scattered in the dirt. She remembered the howl, the glowing eyes, and the overwhelming sense of connection she had felt that night. But now she was different. Her senses were sharper, her movements quicker. She could hear the rustle of a mouse in the underbrush from 100 yards away, and the scent of pine and earth filled her nostrils like a symphony. She had become something else, something between human and beast. The Dogman was never far. She could feel its presence, a shadow that lingered just out of sight. It didn't threaten her. Instead, it seemed to guide her, leading her deeper into the forest. At night, she would hear its howls, a mournful sound that echoed through the trees. It was as if the creature was trying to communicate, to teach her something she couldn't yet understand. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma found herself standing at the edge of a clearing she didn't recognize. In the center was a massive oak tree, its gnarled roots twisting like serpents into the earth. Carved into the bark were symbols, ancient and unfamiliar. She reached out to touch them, and as her fingers brushed the rough surface, a flood of images filled her mind. She saw the forest as it had been centuries ago, untouched by human hands. She saw the first settlers, their axes biting into the trees, their fires lighting up the night. And she saw the Dogman, not as a monster but as a protector, a guardian of the land. It had been here long before the settlers, a spirit bound to the forest, tasked with maintaining the balance between man and nature. But something had gone wrong. The settlers had grown greedy, cutting down more trees than they needed, driving the animals away. The balance had been disrupted, and the Dogman had been forced to act. It had become a legend, a warning to those who would harm the forest. But over time, the legend had twisted, and the creature had been forgotten. Until now, Emma stumbled back, her breath coming in short gasps. The images faded, but the weight of what she had seen remained. She understood now. The Dogman wasn't a curse or a monster. It was a reminder, a living, breathing reminder of the consequences of greed and disrespect. That as she stood there, the Dogman emerged from the shadows, its glowing eyes fixed on her. For the first time she didn't feel fear. Instead she felt a strange sense of kinship. The creature tilted its head as if waiting for her to speak. "I understand," she whispered. "But what do you want from me?" The Dogman let out a low growl, its gaze shifting to the symbols on the tree. Emma followed its eyes, and as she did, she felt a surge of determination. The forest needed her, not as a photographer but as something more. She didn't know what that meant yet, but she was ready to find out. The Dogman turned and disappeared into the trees, its howl echoing through the night. Emma took a deep breath and followed, her footsteps silent on the forest floor. She didn't know where the path would lead, but she knew one thing for certain. Her story was far from over. The forest seemed to welcome Emma as she followed the Dogman deeper into its heart. The air grew thicker, the trees taller, and the shadows longer. She felt a strange sense of belonging, as if the forest had been waiting for her all along. The Dogman moved swiftly, its form blending seamlessly with the darkness, but Emma kept pace, her newfound instincts guiding her. After what felt like hours, they arrived at a place unlike any she had ever seen. It was a hidden grove, untouched by time. The trees here were ancient, their branches intertwining to form a natural cathedral. In the center of the grove stood a stone altar, covered in moss and carved with the same symbols she had seen on the oak tree. The air hummed with energy, and Emma felt a deep reverence for the place. The Dogman stopped at the edge of the grove and turned to her. Its glowing eyes bore into hers, and for the first time it spoke, not in words, but in a voice that resonated in her mind. "You are the bridge," it said. "The bridge between the old world and the new. The forest has chosen you." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Chosen me for what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "To restore the balance," the Dogman replied. "The forest suffers. The greed of man has poisoned the land, and the spirits grow restless. You must remind them of the old ways, of the harmony that once was." Emma looked down at her hands, which trembled slightly. "But how? I'm just one person. How can I fix what's been broken?" The Dogman stepped closer, its presence both intimidating and comforting. "You are not alone. The forest will guide you. And I will be with you as I have been with those who came before." Emma's mind raced. She thought of the townsfolk, of their fear and their ignorance. She thought of the trees being cut down, the animals driven from their homes. She thought of the symbols on the oak tree and the visions they had shown her. And she knew, deep in her heart, that this was her purpose. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady now. "I'll protect the forest. I'll remind them." The Dogman let out a low, approving growl. Then, it turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving Emma alone in the grove. But she didn't feel alone. The forest surrounded her, its energy pulsing through her veins. She knelt by the stone altar and placed her hand on its surface. The symbols glowed faintly and she felt a surge of power. From that day forward, Emma became the guardian of the forest. She returned to Black Hollow, but she was no longer the woman they had known. Her eyes held a new intensity, and her movements were fluid, almost predatory. She spoke to the townsfolk of the forest's plight, of the need to respect the land and live in harmony with nature. Some listened while others dismissed her as mad. But those who ventured into the forest began to notice changes. The trees seemed to grow taller, the air cleaner. The animals returned, their numbers greater than before. And at night, when the moon was full, the howls of the Dogman could be heard once more, a reminder of the balance that had been restored. As for Emma, she was rarely seen in town. She spent her days in the forest, her bond with the land growing stronger with each passing moment. The Dogman was always nearby, a silent protector and guide. Together they ensured that the forest thrived, and that the mistakes of the past were not repeated. Years later, when the townsfolk spoke of Emma, they did so with a mixture of awe and fear. Some called her a hero, others a myth. But all agreed on one thing: the forest was alive and it was watching. And so, the legend of the Dogman lived on, intertwined with the story of the woman who had become its ally. The forest remained a place of mystery and wonder, a testament to the power of balance and the enduring spirit of those who fought to protect it.